welcome to this lesson for higher biology. So we are now in Unit 3 and this is the first lesson of the first key area, and we're going to be focusing on food supply. So previous to now, this would really take into account your National 5 biology work, predominantly that around photosynthesis and food chains and how energy is passed along a food chain. Once we have looked at the issues around food supply, we're going to move on to look at how we can increase and improve plant growth. So today we are learning about how we can increase our food supply in order to support the increased demand. And you are needed to be able to state why there is an increased demand for food and what we mean by food security. Explain what is meant by sustainable food production and the factors that influence it. Describe the methods used to improve crop efficiency and explain why livestock yield less food per area than plants do. So to get started with the need for our current food supply to increase, if we consider this graph here, this is all about the human population and the fact that it is rapidly increasing and has been for some years now. If we look at the current estimates, so obviously we're in 2020 or 2021 and we're looking at around here. So this is roughly where we're expected to see either a huge exponential increase if this is our high estimate, this is our medium estimate, and this is our low estimate, and this is the sort of actual level at the moment. So we're just over the 7 billion, obviously. Now, obviously that human population is depending on a sufficient and a sustainable supply of food for its survival. As this global population continues to increase, so too does the demand for food. And there have been some changes to agricultural practices, and that's helped raise our crop yield, so we've produced more food. However, that effect is starting to level off as we're seeing this huge increase in our population. As can be seen in this graph, the demand for animal protein in particular has been increasing since the 1960s, with variability depending on the type of animal protein, and there's a number of reasons for that, usually cultural. It's not always an efficient method of providing nutrition, however, and our current levels of food production are not going to meet this projected demand. There are already many people in the world, the UN estimates around 30%, who lack any kind of food security. Now, the term food security itself is referring to a population having access to food of sufficient quantity and quality. And really what we're looking at there is the fact that in quantity, there must be sufficient food available at all times. The quality of the food, it must be sufficiently nutritious and varied in order to provide a balanced diet, and access, that people have the economic means to obtain the available food. So obviously you can have a variety of different levels of food security, if you like, in one street. Different households could have different availability to access different amounts or quality of food. So it's not necessarily an international issue. Obviously there are some countries where food security is greater than it is in others. However, it's worth remembering that regardless, there are always a small portion of the population who are going to struggle to have that food security. Now, to think about this in a different way, let's imagine you've been told you can have £1 million to live on this island for 3 months. However, you need to make a choice about your food options. So option A, that would give you purely Wotsits for ever. You would have 3 months worth of free unlimited supply of Wotsits. But that's all you get. Option B, you're given 5 chickens and 1 apple tree. Now that doesn't cost you anything. And option C, you've got an unlimited supply of proteins, fruits, vegetables, and a variety of grains, and each meal is going to cost you £5,000. So obviously option A is giving you your free unlimited supply. So you've got quantity and you've got access, but you're not got much quality there. You're going to struggle to feel terribly healthy on a diet of Wotsits for 3 months. Option B, You've got better quality, you've got access, so you've got your 5 chickens, you've got 1 apple tree, so you've got some eggs available, you could kill a chicken if you felt you were able to, you've got the apple tree, so you've got some quality, you've got a bit of available nutrition in there. You've got the access, and you're just lacking a little bit in quantity. So is 5 chickens going to be enough? Is a few apples off your tree going to be enough? So that might be a bit of a struggle. With option C, you've got your unlimited supply, so you've got a variety of different fruits and veg and protein. So you've got quality, and you've also got quantity, but you've got limited access. That's costing you a lot more. So that's just to give you an idea of what we mean by the different factors involved in food security. Now, the main issues around food security are that with a lack of food security, that can obviously lead to starvation, it can lead to malnutrition, and where individuals are becoming malnourished, that can obviously have an impact on their health otherwise. And where the price of food, producing enough food, is going to increase, that cost is usually passed on to the consumer. And that has led to riots and civil unrest in a number of countries. For example, in 2008 there were riots in Haiti, Egypt, Bangladesh as a result of the rising price, particularly of wheat, soya and rice, which are forming large parts of the local diets there. Now, our previous attempts to increase the levels of food production have depended on the use of quantities of fertilisers and pesticides. We've had intensive multi-crop farming methods, and that has led to some environmental degradation. Now, attempts to reverse that are underway, and to make sure that our increased food production occurs in a way which does not degrade the natural resources on which the agriculture depends. So sustainable food production is going to be therefore about finding the balance between providing the sufficient volumes of quality food and preventing any damage or further damage to the environment. Now, our agricultural production depends on factors that control photosynthesis and plant growth. Around 95% of the global food supply relies on quite a limited number of plant species, and there's only a small percentage of land available that is suitable for growing these crops, and that really makes land a limiting factor in our food supply. When you look at this map, for example, it is the dark green and the light green areas that are those which are most effective for growing crops. And even then, the light green areas are only suitable if they can be improved in some way, which may not be all that cost effective. As a result, this means that we must make sure our food production is as efficient as it possibly can be. So these smaller areas of land which are suitable for growing crops, we need to try and get as much crop out of them as we possibly can in an efficient and sustainable way. So the main crop species are our cereals, our root crops and our legumes. And all of our sustainable food production is going to depend on the factors that control the growth of these plants, so that would predominantly be photosynthesis. It's also worth remembering that plants are going to be vital as food for animal crops as well as a food source in and of themselves. So if we're trying to farm animals, we also need to be able to be feeding them some kind of plant material. Therefore, we need to be making sure we've got enough crops to feed the animals. Now, when we need to look at increasing our plant growth, we have a few different options. Obviously, we're looking to try and increase the levels of photosynthesis if we can, so we need to be providing the raw materials there. We can also provide additional fertilisers for our plants. We may choose to protect them from pests or diseases or competition from weeds, for example. And we can also look at breeding what's referred to as cultivars. Now, a cultivar is just a way of saying cultured variety. So, for example, over many years, we have bred wild mustard plants. We've taken various areas from that and we've bred 4 main plants from it. We've bred cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower and kale, all come from what was originally a wild mushroom plant. And when we're breeding these different varieties of plants, we tend to be looking for crops that have got maybe a higher nutritional value, they've maybe got a natural resistance to pest or disease, or they might be they've got physical characteristics that make them easier to grow or even easier to harvest. They may also be more or less suitable for particular environmental conditions. So those would be the things that a breeder would be looking for when they're breeding those cultivars. Now we're going to be coming back to all of these factors later on in the course, what fertilisers do, the difference is in pest protection methods, and we'll also be looking a little bit more at breeding. Now it's worth remembering that not all of our land use is always that productive. So energy is often lost by a consumer. The energy gained by a consumer from its food is mostly used for movement, and it's used for maintaining body temperature. Remember, our individuals which are requiring to increase their metabolism to stay warm in colder environments or stay hot or stay cold in warmer environments are going to be using up quite a lot of their energy. Some of it is also lost as undigested food and waste, and consequently most of the energy taken in by an organism and released as a result of respiration is going to be lost. Only about 10% is actually incorporated into the body tissue and therefore passed along the food chain. The biggest consequence of this, and the reason we need to consider it when we're talking about food supply, is that if in every food chain energy is lost at each trophic level, it's not all that efficient in order for humans to consume animals rather than humans consuming plants. As you can see in this example, when the crops are fed to the animal, we're passing far less energy on to the human. 100 kilojoules is being passed on to the human in the end. On the other hand though, if we have the human consuming the cereal plant directly, we're getting 1,000 kilojoules of energy from the same reason. So we're looking at shortening the food chain is providing more energy available, and we're being able to keep a greater quantity of energy within that food. Finally, we have to consider how suitable the land is for being able to grow crops on. It may be that we have some habitats that are steep or grassy, and we can't really use them for the cultivation of crop plants. However, that means we can use them for more efficient livestock production, and that's where we could be considering making our land use more efficient. So from that, you should know a little bit more about why we have an increased demand for food and the importance of food security. So obviously the fact that the human population is growing rapidly, and food security allows everyone to have access to food of sufficient quantity and quality. That sustainable food production is going to involve producing enough food but without damaging the environment any further. Methods used to improve crop efficiency would be adding fertilisers, using pesticides, protecting crops from pests, diseases and competition, and also breeding cultivars of different plants which would have greater or more useful characteristics. Also, that livestock yield less food per area than plants, and because we're losing energy at each level of the food chain. So by humans eating the livestock directly, we're getting less energy passed on to us. So that's all for this lesson. Please do get in touch if you do have any questions.